Welcome back to a Timey Wimey pod where we watch every episode of Doctor Who from 2005 onwards. My name's Rebecca,
I'm Haley.
and today we're discussing Series 3, Episode 9, The Family of Blood.
Yes, we are. And it's going to be an exciting one to talk about.
Now, I couldn't really find any fantastic facts for this episode, but as you guys know, this episode was written by Paul Cornell, directed by Charles Palmer, and it aired June 2nd, 2007. One thing I did find kind of interesting is that Harry Lloyd, who plays Son of Mine in this episode, was rumored to be replacing David Tennant as the Doctor, but obviously that didn't happen.
Tea.
hmm It's always so funny when what happens when we know like an actor is leaving the show and all the rumors about who's going to replace them, they're never right. They're always wrong.
Mm-mm.
But it's so funny to see the names people come up with, and there's always like the Sun article claiming to have like leaked it, and it's never right, but it's always entertaining.
It is always entertaining. I don't even know what kind of doctor that would be because he's so evil in these two episodes. The
Yeah,
character, Baines, not the actor
right.
himself.
He's so evil. Um, yeah, I mentioned this last week, but I really like his performance here, and I think he's a great
Mm-hmm.
actor. But I've never seen him in anything else, so I don't know.
No. Yeah, apparently he was in Game of Thrones. I learned that this week.
Who wasn't?
Honestly, so true.
Anyways, back to our Doctor Who discussion. Yeah, that's really all I have as far as fantastic facts for the week.
So, in our last episode, we discussed all about human nature, and human nature kind of left on a cliffhanger of having John Smith choose between his lover or his friend. And I always find it really interesting how it's written that, like, all of that settles because John Smith remains a coward in this scene, and Martha is
Mm-hmm.
like, getting everyone out, and then Tim just randomly opens the watch
Mm.
somehow just at the right time to get the family distracted enough so like that they're not going to kill other people.
Yeah, Doctor Who cliffhangers are really funny because
Mm-hmm.
it'll end with something like you have to choose between your lover and your friend, or like Rose being taken by the Daleks, or yeah, the Slitheen are gonna blow up the world, and then the issue's always resolved in like 10 seconds. Like Martha just
Yeah.
immediately somehow gets control of the gun, and then she has it, and like you said, everyone's able to leave.
Yeah, very interesting for sure. But I do have to say, Martha slays in this scene. Like, she is
hmm
fantastic.
I love how she takes control and really steps up and, has to deal with the doctor not being there, and she's ordering everyone to get out, and she has to like tell John Smith to leave, and she's trying to get him to listen to her, and she really just has to step up, and she does so wonderfully.
Also in the scene and all of like the shuffle and the chaos, I forget exactly how it happens, if like John brushes up against Tim or what, but basically Tim has this moment where he yells at John Smith being like, don't touch me, you're just as bad as the rest of them, referring
Mm.
to the family. And I find that really interesting because there's that interesting parallel where the family is like inhabiting these humans' bodies, and the doctor, it's still his body, but he's really also being like a human. Like, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, you're right. And I never really thought about it in that way. They're all kind of impersonating humans, or like taking control of human lives and bodies in this episode. And obviously, for the doctor, it's a little different. I do also really kind of like that moment with Tim and how it comes back around at the end of the episode, and that speech he makes, but we'll get more into that later. David's outfit is very 11 coded.
It really is. He really said bow ties are cool like 2 seasons early.
Yeah, he was getting ready.
He was. I love it though.
I love when Martha says, "You're rubbish as a human." Makes me laugh every time.
Me too. And she was so right for that because I really liked the character of John Smith. For the most part, I had, like, with some caveats in Human Nature in the first part. But girl, in this second part, John
Mm-hmm.
Smith is a big wimp. I'm sorry. He's so annoying in this episode.
So whiny. I'm sorry, but it just gets so annoying. Like all the crying and tears about like, am I not good enough? Like, why can't I stay John Smith? And like, it's really good acting. David does a
Yeah.
great job, and I do feel for him. But after like, after a while, it's like, oh my gosh, like, come on.
No, honestly. I also want to ask the question, why is he calling everyone to arms? Like everyone, like
Yeah,
all of the boys to get ready to start shooting the scarecrows and like the family. Like even Joan says to him, the John I was getting to know wouldn't be okay with this. And like this doctor person wouldn't be okay with this either. So like why? Why is he doing this?
yeah. I guess it's like maybe it's like the school protocol or something, and I think he was also scared
Mm,
about what they were saying and what it meant for him and his life. But yeah, it is kind of crazy. And the scene later on with all the boys and their guns and they're shooting the scarecrows
mm.
is so sad, and they're all crying, and it's like these are just boys, and like watching that scene, it's like these are just kids forced to fight, and it is just like so harrowing and sad. And
And
then John Smith has the moment of being like, no, we're not doing this anymore, and he
mhm.
has everyone leave, he has everyone retreat.
Yeah, but with the scene with the boys, it's like it's almost a snapshot of what is coming in like the
Mm-hmm.
not so distant future for them in this time period, which is World War One, and we'll flash forward to that at the end of this episode, and once we get there, we'll talk more about it. But you're right, it is harrowing, and it is just so heartbreaking to watch. And like, yeah, John eventually says like, "Hey, that's enough," but it's like too late. Like those boys already, shotguns at what they thought were actual targets. It ended up being scarecrows, which like how did they die? Like, I'm kind of confused because they're scarecrows.
I don't know. And then they come back, Bane just says reanimate and then they come
Yeah.
back.
Yeah. I feel like
um
that's an interesting thing. But yeah, all of that whole like part of this episode is so intense.
mhm.
But again, the actor playing Baines in this episode does a marvelous job. Like, I hate his character so much. He is so creepy. And that is how you know you have done your job so well, when you make it so convincing.
I love the conversation that he has with the headmaster, and he talks
Mhm.
about how the family has seen what's to come, and he's like, "Do you think they'll thank you, for teaching them about the glories of battle, and a year from now when they're in the mud and the barbed wire?" And that speech, it's so haunting. And do you think they'll thank you? The man who taught them, it was glorious. And yeah, I just find that really interesting. And it's a really interesting commentary on how just I think we view war, and it's just like people like the headmaster hold it up as this like thing that he was supposed to do, and it was a good thing he did. And it's like, but you're training these kids to kill people, and it was just like really interesting to think, yeah, in a year from now, all these kids are going to be fighting in a war that they didn't want or didn't ask for. And I don't know, it's just really interesting.
Again, like the scene where Joan is talking to John about all of this and like, why are you doing this? John says, like, what other choice do I have? Which I
Hmm.
find is like the most human answer, honestly. And it tracks because he's very much a human in this episode. Because we know the doctor, as the doctor would look for any like other plan or loophole and wouldn't just say, what other choice do I have? I mean, unless it's the Daleks, but that's kind of a different situation. Or the Cybermen.
Or
okay,
the
I need
Master.
Okay, we can't continue down this line actually.
but no, I get
like,
what you're saying. I think sometimes we as humans think, you know, we have to do this. We don't have any choice. There's no other option. But that's what's so great about a character like the Doctor is they always find, or most of the time, they find the other option, you know, something they can do instead. And, you know, we don't have to fight and kill. There's a way around it. And I think that just really showed the differences between John Smith and the Doctor. I also like how earlier in that scene in their conversation, she's, you know, questioning him and trying to get him to talk about childhood hiding spots and learn about where he grew up, and he just has, you know, facts but not any like real human information. And the way David delivers the line, how can you think I'm not real? When I kissed you, was that not real? Like, he just delivers those lines so well, and the chemistry and connection between them, you really feel it. You feel the care and love that these two characters have for each other, and it's just really a testament to David's performance. Like, he plays two different people so well.
We love David Tennant on this podcast, and we just have to give him his flowers because, man, can that man act.
Now, Martha delivers one of her best scenes in this episode, and that is when she goes to look for the watch and Nurse Redfern follows her, and Martha's explaining, you know, she's human, the Doctor is an alien, Martha's trying to become a doctor, and Joan says, you can't be a doctor, and certainly not someone with your skin color can be a doctor. And Martha serves, she absolutely claps back, names all the bones in your hand, which, like, oh my god, every time I watch it I'm like, wow, that's a lot. I couldn't do that. I couldn't remember all those things. And it's one of the best scenes we get of Martha, and I love it.
I love this scene too, and I just love how in this scene and throughout this episode, Martha just kind of keeps pushing Joan of being like, no, like, I am studying to be a doctor. John Smith is the Doctor, and she's just really trying to continue to help Joan see that truth, even though she hasn't been treated that well by Joan. And going back to that scene, it's a great one.
Yeah, I love when Joan is like, well, you read that in a book, and Martha's like, yeah, to pass my exams. Like, yeah, I did read it in the book, my textbook. No, it's such a great moment. And going back to what you said about how the Doctor yells at her, or John Smith yells at her, and she's also dealing with this with Joan, and then the headmaster is rude to her at so many points. Martha's treated terribly by every single person in this episode. Her only friend at the school, Jenny, has, you know, is dead. Her body's being taken over, and yet she doesn't leave. She stays by the Doctor. She keeps fighting. She tries to keep him safe. She's doing everything she can, trying to find that freaking watch. That she poor Martha. She walks by Tim with that watch like so many times, and she's losing her mind trying to find it.
No, she is. The one scene when she is like searching through all the papers, and then she just like screams and throws them in the air. Such a mood, honestly.
Yeah, it really is.
Speaking about Tim, there's this honestly really creepy moment that happens in this episode that is done actually really well. Like, Doctor Who has had lots of horror moments and honestly does the horror moments really well, and this is no exception, because Tim is like at the end of this empty hallway and he's opening up the watch yet again. Dude, just give the watch back, but I digress. And the watch starts saying like, beware of her, and he looks up and it's the girl with the red balloon at the end of this empty hallway, and it is so incredibly creepy that she is just standing there asking questions. I don't know. It's just so creepy. Like, her and the scarecrows together, the horror elements. Well done. but very scary.
Yeah, I agree. And I think throughout this episode, as Tim has the watch and he's listening to it, he becomes a little doctory himself. He says to the girl, well, how strong do you think that girl is? Like, she's not strong enough to take me, or whatever he says. And there's a really great moment with Hutchinson when they're about to like take arms, and he leaves. Oh, well, first he says, maybe I was given this watch so I could help. Boy, you stole that watch. It was not given to you. You stole that watch.
Literally.
But then Hutchinson yells at him for running away, like, Latimer, you coward. And Tim says, yes, sir, every time. And if that's not a doctory line, specifically a ninth doctor line, I don't know what is. And I just really loved it. And yeah, you can really feel like kind of the essence of the Doctor going into Tim a little bit while he's having this watch. And we get these great moments of just seeing his character development a little bit. And I love when we get that flash forward of him in the trenches, and he and Hutchinson like are able to escape the bomb or whatever's happening. And I don't know, I really like that.
I never honestly really thought about it that way, but as you were mentioning these different moments with Tim, you're totally right. Like, he really does have those doctor isms throughout this episode as he's holding the watch. And something that he like kind of maintains in this episode is that he's meant to keep this watch until a certain point, which that certain point is at the end of this episode. But again, why did you steal it in the first place, dude?
Yeah. Shouldn't have taken it, but oh well.
Okay, I have a question, and I watched this scene really carefully. It's back to we're back to talking about like the shooting gun scene. I couldn't fully tell, but it really looked like all of the boys were shooting guns, and John Smith was holding one, but John Smith himself wasn't shooting it.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what happened. I think he started and then stopped, and it was like he was kind of watching what happened, and I think he realized they were shooting scarecrows that were just hay. But no, I definitely noticed that he stopped at one point. Then shortly after, he has everyone else stop and retreat, like we said, which is interesting. Definitely a moment where the Doctor's kind of sneaking in there.
Yeah.
Okay, how do they move the TARDIS? So
I was just about to ask.
And Rose, they find the TARDIS in that shed that it just randomly was. We saw it in the last episode. And then they bring it to the school. How did they move it? It bugs me every single time I watch this. How did they move it? How did they get it there?
How long did it take to move it? Because obviously they would have to push it. But first of all, how do you push a TARDIS? How heavy is an actual TARDIS, actually? Yeah. Why would the TARDIS even let you push it?
How do they move it? It just doesn't make sense.
No, it really doesn't. But the way they act with the TARDIS is so creepy. Like, they're just creepily guarding it at the entrance to the school.
Yeah.
And by that point, like, Martha and the Doctor and Joan are all, like, outside of the school. They've abandoned all of the children. The headmaster has been murdered, and they've just all run off.
Yeah, though, to be fair, I think a lot of like the kids also ran off and kind of like went to the village or something. But yeah, they do kind of abandon. They even like go back. John Smith is like, oh, I'm gonna go double check to make sure no one's in there. But then something happens and they have to leave, and we know that Tim was still in there. So it's like, ooh, who else was there?
Yeah, but when they're like behind the bush staring at the TARDIS, Martha's like, surely John or Doctor, you remember the TARDIS. And he says, I've never seen that before in my life.
I do always think that's funny though, because he literally has drawings of it in his journal. So it's like, yes, you have.
No, I know. Even Joan is like, dude, it literally was in your journal. That's yours. Yeah. This is real. This is actually happening. And that's when this diva storms off, because he's like, no, I want to stay here as a human.
Yeah. It does. I do feel for him when he's crying and says he just wants to be John Smith, and isn't that enough? Can't he just be John Smith? You really do feel for him.
Yeah. And I know I've been hating as we've been talking about him, like in this episode, I've been hating on him and calling him a wimp and a diva, which I still feel is very true. But also at the same time, I don't want anyone to misunderstand because the whole kind of qualms he has in this episode about staying John Smith or becoming the doctor, it is something that is truly emotional because when you think about the character of the doctor, you know that the doctor is always lonely. Even if they have a companion, they're lonely. And this is something that is talked about later on in this episode between Martha and John. So, like, the whole emotional breakdown and kind of like reckoning over what to do and just like changing back to the doctor, like, that is really emotional to watch, and it is really like painful and heartbreaking when you really think deeply about it and just how much the doctor has lost. And if John, stayed himself, he would have a love and he would have this life, but at the same time, like, tragically, that's not his story. So even though I have my problems with him being really really emotional in this episode, I
Hmm.
get it.
I do feel for him, but no, I completely agree. I do get tired of it towards the end. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, come on, let's
Yeah.
open the freaking watch. But I do feel for him, like, in these kind of moments. And this is when Martha and Joan and John, they end up hiding out in the Cartwell house, and we find out that's the house of the girl with the red balloon. And Joan correctly guesses that the family's all dead now because of what happened.
And in this house is when him and Martha really have their, I don't know, confrontation,
Mm-hmm.
but the moment where he's just laying it all on Martha. Like, why did you let this happen to me? You want me to become the doctor? You just want me to become lonely? And he's just putting so much weight on Martha, which is just so unfair. And I feel like it's not even at the end of this episode, there's no like actual true apology for that. Like, all the
No,
doctor says is thank you for like being by my side through all of this. But he literally just like berates Martha, and it is so insane.
I know, it's really sad, and he blames her for not interfering with, like, him and Nurse Redfern, and it's like, what was she supposed to do? Like, she tried, but, you can't really interfere with something like that. And it always stays with me how Martha says, like, "He didn't tell me what to do if that happened," and John Smith says, "He didn't think about falling in love. Like, what kind of man is that? That's who you want me to be?" And the truth is that John Smith doesn't know that this is a doctor that's so capable of love. And the reason he wasn't thinking about it, one, that's just not who the doctor is. He wouldn't be thinking about it. But two, he's still actively mourning his own love and someone he
Mm-hmm.
lost.
And then there's a knock at the door, and it's Tim, and he's like, I've brought you this watch. Here you all go. But before
Finally.
he goes, finally, it's about time. But before he goes off, he has this incredible monologue that
Hmm.
honestly I love so much. And he says about the doctor that he's like fire and ice and rage. He's like the night and the storm in the heart of the sun. He's ancient and forever. He burns at the center of time and he can see the turn of the universe. And he's wonderful. I love his whole monologue so much.
Yeah. No, I completely love that too. And he says before that, he didn't give them the watch earlier because he was scared. He was scared of the doctor. And then he goes on that big speech and ends with, and he's wonderful. And it's so true. The doctor is all those things, terrifying and fire and ice and destruction, but also love and hope and excitement and wonder. And it's such a good speech, and it always ends up in so many Doctor Who edits, and it's easy to see why. This is also where Martha confesses her feelings for the doctor. What do you think of this speech that she gives him and her, finally telling him how she feels and what that means, for them going forward?
Honestly, I can't really blame her. I think
Mm-hmm.
it was the combination. The reason why she said it then was a combination of two things. One, she really was trying everything she possibly could to convince John Smith to transform into the doctor so that the family would stop bombing the village and killing people. And the second reason is I think she just honestly wanted to get it out there. She has kept that like close to her chest all season long, and I think she's honestly sick of it a little, or she just wants to let it out. Like she's kind of accepted or has begun to accept that like he's not into her like that. So I can't really fault her for sharing how she's truly been feeling in this moment and in this episode. I mean, I think it definitely something like that always opens up like complicated dynamics. And we see at the end of this episode, she's like, hey, just so you know, I was trying whatever I could to convince
That
you.
was a joke. Do you remember, like,
Yeah.
back in middle school, if there was a thing where your friend would be like texting the guy and she'd be like, oh, I like you, and then it'd be like, oh, sorry, my sibling took my phone, like, and they text you that. Haha.
Oh my gosh, yes.
It was very much that.
Mm-hmm.
But I do really love that scene with her and John Smith, and I love when she says, I hope that he doesn't remember this when he,
So real.
comes back. And I think also she just missed him a lot at this point. Like, she's gone, it's been
Yeah.
2 months of this pretending and being without the doctor, her friend, and she's so desperate at this point to get him back because she knows once he's back, he can take care of all of this. He can deal with the family. No one else has to die. And she's so desperate just to get him to come back.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And we have this moment where he's holding the watch, finally holding the watch.
Mm-hmm.
And you just see him like he has that doctor in him. Like he's telling Tim that, oh, you have a low telepathic field. You were probably like born with it. That's why you've been having visions and stuff like that. And he just says it in a doctory way. And you just see Martha start to smile
Mm-hmm.
because he's coming back. But then he catches himself and you just see Joan all teary eyed and emotional. And it's back to that whole back and forth of will he or won't he become the doctor? And of
Mm-hmm.
course, we all know and did know that like he would become the doctor. Like, I think that's
Yeah.
obvious, even if like this is your first time watching these episodes. But yeah, it's still that whole back and forth. And him and Joan have this private moment between the two of them where he's holding the watch and he just sees their lives as a couple flash before his eyes, them getting married and having kids and him dying on his deathbed. And he kind of gets to see what that life would be. But ultimately, like, the family's not stopping. Like, they're continuing to bomb the
Mm-hmm.
village. And it's reached the point where, like, he needs to change back. Of course, he has the moment where he's like, oh, I know, I can trick them. I can just give them the stopwatch. And Martha is like, no, that's not how it works. Literally, shut
And
up.
and even Joan says, like, in the journal, like, they're not going to stop. They're just going to keep going across the universe, killing and
Mm-hmm.
ruining lives forever because now they'll have this Time Lord lifespan. And I love that moment where he first holds the watch and we hear the doctor's voice again. It's like, oh yes, he's coming back finally.
Yeah.
And then again later, it's so great. And then they have that whole montage, which I really like. And Joan talks about how that's a life that the doctor could never have. And that is really a recurring theme for the doctor in general, but especially throughout the 10th doctor's run, that's the
Yeah.
life I can never have, or that's the life you can, like, it's something that is said a million times. And I just think it's so interesting And it made me think about the 14th Doctor and his ending, and how at the end of it he finally does get that life. And it really, I don't know, I'm talking about something years years later, but it just kind of made me happy to think about, because it's like it felt, because we talked before about how we were coming to terms with the 60th specials and that kind of by generation ending. And it just made me realize that that's the ending that the 10th Doctor never got. And I don't know. It just kind of made me happy. Like, oh, now he did get that life. He does, get the day to day after day. And I don't know. It's kind of nice.
Yeah, you're right. And I really like what Joan says to John
Mm.
in like one of these last scenes. She says to him, like, if John Smith truly doesn't exist, I don't want that love, because that's not fully you. Like, going back to her saying, this is the life the Doctor could never have. She really completely understands it. Like, in her heartbreak with her love with John Smith, she completely understands it. And I really do appreciate that aspect of her character, that she's really come to realize that. And, flashing forward to the end, when she asks him after he asks her to travel as a companion, she's like, but would any of this have happened if you didn't
Mm.
choose to stay here?
Yeah. There's a real tragedy to her character. She just kind of was unlucky enough to happen to be in the place where she
Mm-hmm.
met the Doctor when he wasn't the Doctor for a brief period of time. And she fell in love with a man that essentially wasn't real, that was fake, was a story, like they say. And she really only loved John Smith. She didn't love the Doctor. She wasn't really interested in this fairy tale hero. She loved John Smith. And it's really sad. And I do like that
Mm-hmm.
line, like you mentioned, like, oh, if he's not you, I don't want him. And yeah, it is really sad at the end when they're talking. And I always find it really interesting. The Doctor like kind of begs her to come with him. Like he asks her like two or three times, like, come with me, like please come with me. And he's even like, we could give it a try, we could give it a chance. Like he's willing to just kind of have her with them and see what happens. Give He says we could try again. And I find that really interesting. What do you think?
I find that really interesting as well. And I think there's like this dynamic between them of Joan very much wants to close that door completely. And that's why she asks that question at the end, like, would this have happened if you hadn't come here? And on his end, I think part of him feels guilty for putting her through all that he put her through. And he's trying to make up for some of it. And I think that's one of the reasons that's pushing him to really press her to become a companion, but ultimately that's not the dynamic
Mm-hmm.
that would work between the two of them, because the Doctor and John Smith are so different, and Joan's relationship with the Doctor is worlds apart from John Smith.
Yeah, and it always makes me so sad when she says John Smith is dead and you look just like him. Like that's
Yeah.
heartbreaking. And not to talk about a future episode again, but I'm going to. End of Time. It always fascinates me to no end that during his goodbye tour, he goes to see one of her great great descendants.
He does, which is
I,
really interesting that that relationship has stuck with him, even though he's
mhm.
not John Smith.
Yeah, I always find that fascinating. And like, why her? Like out of all the characters and all like the people he meets. And I don't know if I really have an answer, but I just think it does speak to, he does really care about her. And I think he did kind of see for a moment this other life he could have. And I don't know, it's really interesting. And we don't really get more of the Doctor's perspective on it besides him going to go visit her
Mm-hmm.
and no, her descendant, and him begging her to go with him. I just think it's really interesting about what the doctor thinks about her and how he views that relationship.
I completely agree. What are your thoughts on the whole kind of conclusion with the family? Like 10 and the spaceship. What are your feelings on all of that?
I love that part. I love, him going, still pretending to be John Smith, accidentally, quote unquote, messing with their controls, pushing all those buttons. And then the moment when he catches the watch and he's back, he's the doctor again, it always makes me so happy. And it's like, he's back. And I don't know, I always just feel so excited when that happens. There's always like a rush, and it's like, finally, like, he's back. You didn't realize how much you missed him, but it's just so nice hearing his voice again, seeing the 10th Doctor, and then when the brown suit comes back and the coat, I'm like, yes, we're back. We're so back.
Yes, I love it all so much. And this part of the episode is something that a lot of people I have seen over the years criticize, not like, think that the Doctor went too far. My opinion is that the theory of the Time Lord is completely valid in this episode because what the family did was just completely evil and despicable, and they wanted to live forever even though their lifespan was like mayflies, like they were going to die after 3 months, and they were so just greedy and wanted to live forever, and the Doctor granted their wish. He just, had the fury of a Time Lord, and he made sure that they would live forever in solitude. And yeah, like I said, like I feel like the fury of the Time Lord makes perfect sense at the end of this episode. Like, because of the family, he became John Smith and had that whole arc.
I completely agree. I love this whole sequence and montage and the voiceover from Son of Mine. We get a little bit of Time Lord Victorious here, which is really great. And yeah, I think this is really the best way to kind of deal with it, because otherwise, what else is he supposed to do with the family? And we know if they got what they wanted, they would have just kept going on, destroying the universe, destroying people's lives. And so he gave them what they wanted, to live forever. And these punishments are so interesting. The sister getting trapped in a mirror, every mirror, forever, is so. I think about that all the time, and how he says that that the doctor still goes and visits her once a year, which is like, does he just look in a mirror once a year? Like, okay. But no, that always stays with me.
Me too. And how daughter of mine is trapped inside a dwarf's. We know she's trapped inside a black hole. A mother of mine.
She is trapped inside a collapsed galaxy.
Okay. And then I know that father of mine is trapped with like chains forged in a dwarf star, basically. But yeah, the punishments are really interesting.
Yeah. The Son of Mine one makes me wonder, eventually someone moved that scarecrow. Eventually someone did something. You know, like, they probably, I don't know, but so it's like, what kind of happens there? But yeah, I still like that ending, kind of forcing him to watch over England fields. I kind of liked that ending. But yeah, I think this is one of the best 10th Doctor moments. It's so, like you said, we really see the fury of the Time Lord here. We see a little bit of Time Lord Victorious, and it's a great moment. And I really also like the line of, we realized why the Doctor had run away. It was out of kindness. He was trying to just let time run out, but they messed up and found out.
Yep. And then coming to the end of this episode, 10 has that moment where he tries to get Joan to travel with him, and she ends up telling him that in the end, John Smith was braver than the Doctor because John Smith chose to die. I'm like, yeah, he
After
did.
whining about for like an hour.
No, literally. But yeah, that line does cut.
Mhm.
And then, you have Ten thanking Martha, which is the least he could do.
Literally the least. He's like, thanks.
Yeah.
It's like, but I do like their hug at the end. That is very sweet.
No, it is really, really sweet. And how they're just happy to be back to their dynamic of traveling. And I love how Tim comes to them at the end and, Ten gives Tim the stopwatch and is like, hey, you can keep it. I really like that. And I like the scene of Tim and his classmate as they're fighting in the trenches in World War One. And Tim is like, I forget exactly what he says, but whatever it is, he's like, the time is now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they move out of the way and they avoid being killed by like a bomb or a shell or whatever it's called. So that's cool that helped him out. And then you just see in the very ending scene Martha and Tim off in the distance as Tim, as an old man, is getting awarded. Yeah, he's getting awarded for his service in the war,
I
I'm
think it was
assuming.
like some kind of memorial for like fallen World War One soldiers, but
Oh.
I don't know. I could be wrong. I think it was like a Remembrance Day kind of thing because those poppies that they wear. Forgive us, British listeners. I'm so sorry, but I believe that poppy is like a specific thing to honor like World War One veterans.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting. That's cool though. I like how they were able to like show us the audience that Tim lived into old age.
Yeah. And I really like that moment once they survive the bomb and Hutchinson is like, just leave me. And he's like, nope, remember all those years ago, like I told you we were going to make it. And they just keep going. And you still see there's a little bit of, doctory can do attitude in him. And I
Yeah.
love seeing that moment.
Me too. It's a great one.
Hmm. Now, who is the star of the show?
Okay, I actually have a problem because I have like multiple different people I want to choose at the same time.
There's a couple contenders for sure. And for this, where we can choose anyone from both parts because we didn't do it for last week's episode.
Okay, my star of the show is going to be incredibly controversial, actually. And I don't normally choose an evil character, but hear me out. Baines. He just, I don't know, he plays his part as Son of Mine so well. I guess I should say Son of Mine more than Baines, actually, because I hate Baines, but Son of Mine, he did an excellent job.
Yeah, Harry Lloyd, he kills it. He's incredible in these episodes.
Yeah. Who's your star of the show?
For me, I'm gonna, despite, my frustrations, I feel like you gotta give it to Tim. Like, he really just steps up, kind of saves the day in a lot of ways. Also, like, interferes with saving the day in a lot of ways, but at the end of the day, he comes through. And he's a really great character to follow. And I'm also going to give a special shout out to Jenny. Gone too soon. Rest in peace, my girl Jenny. But I just got to give a shout out to her. She seems so fun in Human Nature, so cool. And like, I'm glad Martha had a friend with her for those 2 months. And I feel really bad for her that she lost Jenny. And I'm sure that was really sad. So, special shout out to Jenny.
Love you, Queen.
Fly high. Now, what is the heart of this story?
The heart of this story is that basically, don't be greedy. Don't want to live forever because you're just going to be cursed at the end of the day, like the family were. And I would also add that if you fall in love with a man named John Smith, just be really careful.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar. Just, when you're falling in love, just double check that he is not secretly someone else whose personality is stuck inside an old fob watch. And that's a lesson that we could all learn from, truly.
No, truly. If you see a man with a fob watch, stay away.
Watch out. Watch out. Fob watches in this show cannot be trusted.
No, they cannot.
Do we have any reviews from the past?
Yes, I do. I have a few reviews, and this first review that I'm going to be sharing a snippet from is from IMDb, and it was written on June 5th, 2007 by the user Ploop-3, and they said that this episode cuts to the heart of exactly how lonely and thoroughly dangerous the Doctor can be. It's very dark, extremely serious, but thoroughly entertaining and thought-provoking. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be a Time Lord?
No, that's so true.
This last review I have is also from IMDb, and it was written on August 12th, 2007 by the user Katie is so cool. And honestly, I included this review because, you know what? I'll just read it. This reviewer said, "The only criticism I have of this episode was not having more snippets of the Doctor's children. That would have been intriguing." That would have been intriguing from my point of view, but it's probably just me. It probably would have slowed the story down and distracted from the emotional climax, so I think it was the best the way they did it, but maybe they could provide a spin-off as to what happened to the Doctor if he had stayed John Smith. Unlikely, but it would make for an interesting show.
No, it wouldn't. Respectfully to this person, that show would be nothing.
Yeah, no, I agree. I would not want to watch that.
I do always find it kind of funny how they're like in the dream scenario, John Smith is about to die, and Joan is like, all the children send their love. And it's like, where are they? Why aren't they here?
So true, actually.
Before we go, I want to pose a question to you that I always think about when watching these episodes. And I just always wonder how these would be different if Rose was here. And if they did this episode during series 2 with Rose, how the story would have been different, if they would have chosen a different setting or what they would have done with her. And I always think about that, and I want to get your thoughts.
Okay. If they had done this in series 2 with Rose, this is not what I would want. I just want to make this abundantly clear, but this is what I know would probably happen. The setting would be the same. John Smith would be the same. And Rose would be probably the servant. I mean, she was the lunch lady in the school reunion, so I don't have high hopes that the writers would give her a better gig. And if she wasn't a servant, she would probably be a nurse, but also I still feel like Joan would be there, and there would just be a lot of tension with Rose, the Doctor, and Joan.
Yeah, but
Rose would be
also
really upset.
Yeah, I agree. I think it would be way sadder to watch, but I also wonder if like the John Smith and Joan storyline would have really happened, if they would have really gravitated towards each other like they do, but who knows? We'll never know. There's thankfully I've read plenty of fan fictions to help answer this question, but they always put the Doctor and Rose in like a different setting. Which I get, but I always want to know, what if they were here? You know, how would it be different? What story would the TARDIS have given them? But we'll never know. Anything else we need to talk about?
I don't believe so. I am so excited for next week's episode. I cannot wait, y'all.
Yes, we will be back next week with Blink. But until then, you can follow us on Instagram at TimeyWimeyPod. And I don't know if TikTok will still be around when you all are listening to this. But if it is, you can find us at TimeyWimeyPod on TikTok. But you'll always be able to find us on Instagram, TimeyWimeyPod. And you can email us anything and everything to
timeyimeypod@gmail.com. Don't forget to rate our podcast on your favorite listening platform. And we will talk to you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye. Ta-ra. Ta-ra.